And now the time for Oliver Heath. You come. Ciao, Oliver. Welcome to AD Social
Thank you.
Expo 2023. Oliver Heath is an architect and interior designer. His practice, Oliver Heath Design, is a focus in delivering health and well-being in the built environment for the benefit of the people and the planet. There are recognized global experts in biophilic design, promoting human connection to nature.
Is that it? It's good. Very nice. Well done. Okay. I'm not going to sit down because I get a bit frustrated sitting down. So thank you for the introduction. So today I would like to talk to you about how we create better buildings. Buildings that are truly fit for the future. Buildings that are more efficient, more productive, more cost effective, that will be better for you, that will be happier and healthier for both people and the planet. Now, of course, all buildings have an impact. But all too often, we consider that impact to be a negative thing. So often, when we consider the impact of a building, we're thinking about the impact on the wider natural environment. And that's often measured through carbon emissions, through embodied carbon or operational carbon. But alongside this, of course, is the impact that a space has on our physical, mental, and emotional well-being. The cities and buildings that we create are often hard-edged, they're geometric, they're unrelenting, they're fast-paced. And all of this provides an opportunity, creates an environment that is very stressful. It's always on the go. It doesn't provide the opportunity to stop, sit, relax, and recuperate. And as a result, we find a lot of buildings and a lot of cities create a lot of stress. They create a lot of anxiety. And the result of that is poor health and burnout, which isn't good for anybody. So what if we thought about spaces of not having necessarily a negative impact, but about being regenerative? Regenerative to both the natural environment, but also regenerative to the people and the health and well-being of the people that occupy them. What would those buildings look like? What would they make you feel? Well, today what I'd like to do is to answer some of those questions in a conversation around the emerging ethos of biophilic design, or how we enhance the human connection with nature as a means to reduce stress, to aid recuperation, but also to improve our relationship with nature and the wider natural environment. So what I want to do today is to talk to you about this idea of biophilic design. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it is, where it's come from, why it's relevant to all of you and all of your building occupants. I'm going to tell you the key features that make up biophilic design. I'm going to show you some evidence that demonstrates just how important it is to create more efficient buildings. And also some projects of how we actually apply these ideas into built environment spaces. So my company is called Oliver Heath Design. We're based in England, in Brighton by the sea, and we are researchers and design strategists. We're designers of a variety of spaces, from hospitality to healthcare, workplace and education spaces, and we're advocates. So we speak a lot about health and well-being. We're thought leaders in biophilic design, and we like to spread the word about the importance of how we integrate the built environment and the natural world to create better spaces for people and planet. We work with all sorts of international organizations like Bloomberg, Westfield, Akzo Nobel, the Carpet Manufacturers Interface. So we worked across a variety of different building sectors and types. Sometimes we're the lead designers, sometimes we're the consultants alongside design leads. But essentially, we take a regenerative approach to the built environment. And this is really important. On the right-hand side, there's a little chart by the World Green Building Council. And what it demonstrates is that actually when we think about the business costs associated with running a building, only 1% is in energy. Yeah? Actually, 9% is in the rental cost, but 90% of those costs are in staff salaries and benefits. So the cost of having human beings in buildings is enormous, and any building owner and business owner will know exactly that. So this idea of creating regenerative spaces suggests that if we can look after people, if we can create healthier buildings that people want to go to, that they'll occupy, then we'll create a more successful built environment. And overall, what we see is that when we take a more human-centered approach, we have overall perceived well-being, which goes up, and reduced absenteeism, reduced presenteeism, increased staff attraction, and reduced staff turnover. So when we take a human-centered approach, we see a reduction in the negative costs, but an improvement of the intended function of a building. So there are a number of reasons why it's so important to think about the human condition in building, the effects of stress and burnout. Now, firstly, stress is really, really damaging to all of us. We all experience it in buildings. Now, a 2023 study by McKinsey of GCC countries found that on average 64% of employees have experienced physical and mental health issues whilst at work. And 1 in 3 people experience burnout symptoms. So obviously when they experience burnout, they can't come into work, they can't function. So it's going to be costing somebody an awful lot of money to operate in a system like that. On top of that, urbanization is very, very high. In the UAE, 87% of the population now lives in cities. Globally, by 2050, 68% of the world will be living in cities. And as well as that, we have a very high level of mobile technology. So in the UAE, of a population of 9.5 million people, there are 9.8 million mobile smartphone users. So obviously, this proliferation of mobile technology, whilst it keeps us connected, is also potentially very damaging because it is so addictive. And even right now, with me speaking to you, being as entertaining as I can be, some of you are on your mobile phones. I know, it's terrible, isn't it? But this stuff is so addictive, and that is enormously damaging to the intended function of the buildings that we're trying to create. So let's go back a little bit. Why is this relevant to all of you? Well, for 99.5% of human evolution, we've existed in very close connection to healthy forms of nature. We've searched for these environments that can support life, spaces that have natural resources like water, food, fruit, wood for burning, stone for building, spaces that make us safe and secure. So throughout evolution for hundreds of thousands of years, we've found places like this to make us feel safe. And of course, we fast forward today, and still we have what we call a genetic inheritance. That means we can still recognize landscapes that can help us to survive, thrive, and flourish. So when we walk into a space or we walk into a city that's filled with natural light, with fresh air, with greenery, with trees and water and stone, when we walk into spaces or we observe spaces that have all these natural elements, we can immediately recognize that this is a biodiverse environment that can actively support healthy life. So these ideas are encapsulated by something called the savanna theory, which suggests that even now as modern day human beings, we have a preference for looking out over lush, green, natural environments. And when we do that, it still has the ability to reduce our pulse rates of our heart by 15%, reduce stress hormones like cortisol by 6%, reduce blood pressure, makes us less irritable and less grumpy, so we have better connections with other people, and it increases concentration and focus. So we have a preference for looking over lush, green, healthy space, even though, of course, many of us still live in noisy, busy urban cities. So, how do we bring these connections of nature into our modern day built environment? Well, that's where biophilia and biophilic design comes in. So biophilia quite literally means a love of nature. It's a term that was first introduced in the 1960s by Erich Fromm, developed by the godfather of biophilic design, Edward O. Wilson, and developed by the likes of Stephen Kellett. So essentially, biophilia explains why we enjoy being in nature, why when we take a holiday, we tend to go to the beaches, to the mountains, to the forests, in order to reduce our stress, to find ourselves again. So biophilic design essentially are a set of patterns or features that remind us of how good we feel in nature and helps us to bring those connections into the natural world, to find ways of connecting us with nature. It's not just about bringing it in, it's about how we connect with nature. Now, there are 3 core principles to biophilic design. The first is what we call a direct connection, and we've seen some brilliant examples just now of these direct connections to nature. So direct connections are how we bring in connections to natural features, like natural light, fresh air, water, and all those sorts of things. It's those sensory connections to nature. The second is one that we don't recognize quite so much, but that provides enormous opportunities for architects and interior designers. It's what we call indirect connections to nature. It's how we mimic or evoke a feeling of nature in the built environment. And the third one goes back to our evolutionary thinking, is called an experience of space and place. This is how we create buildings that are exciting and stimulating, buildings that we want to go to, but also buildings that are calming, relaxing and restorative, that recognize that our modern day built environment is stressful and provides you a place just to stop, rest, relax and recuperate. So I'm going to run through these. This is what's called the 14 patterns of biophilic design. It was called the 14, they've added another one, so it's now the 50. But the direct connection, so here are some of the ways we can provide real connections to nature. So the visual connection, you know, what we see provides 80% of how we understand the built environment. The non-visual, it's about how we feel nature, how we hear it, how can we smell it, so it's the other senses. Non-rhythmic sensory stimuli is about that gentle movement that we see in nature. It's about fresh air, the presence of water and what we call blue spaces. Dynamic and diffuse natural light, which we know enhances the quality of space. And connections with natural systems, which are the subtle changes that we see throughout a year as nature changes. Now, the indirect connections, or how we mimic or evoke a sense of nature, there are 3. Some of these sound a bit complicated, but you'll know them inherently. Biomorphic forms are those forms that remind us of shapes that we see in nature. It's like a column that reminds us of a tree. Or think about the work of Antoni Gaudi in Spain. You know, those kind of natural shapes, some of those that you can see here, rounded forms. Material connections, it's how we bring materials that remind us of nature, and you can see some of these here in these rotunda shapes here made of natural timber. And also complexity and order. This is how we bring visual richness to engage people with nature and the built environment. And if you think about when we go into nature and we think about the trees and the leaves and the water and the ripples and the gentle movement, that provides an enormous amount of visual richness that engages us, that we don't often see in the built environment. And the third one is the experience of space and place. So this is how we create spaces that are exciting and stimulating, but also calming, relaxing, and restorative. So in here we have ideas such as prospect and refuge. So prospect is when you just kind of get to sit down in a chair and you feel safe. You don't feel that anyone's going to attack you from behind, and that you get to sort of look out over a landscape. And that's often coupled together with refuge. So prospect and refuge is about giving people the opportunity to find a safe space to sit, relax, and recuperate. And then the third ones, the last 3 are mystery. That's creating a sense of engagement and excitement. Peril is about having a sense of intrigue and sort of adrenaline. So if you create buildings with a large drop, you get this sort of sense of vertigo. It's not about putting people in danger. And the last one, awe, is about creating a sense of wonder at your position and your place in the scale of the natural world. So that's what we call the 14 or now 15 patterns of biophilic design. And it's not about using all of those features in any one space, but it's trying to understand how you want people to feel in spaces and how you use the patterns to support or elicit that sense of nature to create spaces that are exciting and stimulating, but also calming, relaxing, and restorative. Now, there were two approaches to biophilic design. One is what we call the neuroscientific approach. And this is really how we create spaces that support the individual. Spaces that help people to reduce stress, to reduce heart rates and blood pressure levels, to help people to recuperate from intense periods of activity. The other one is what we call a socio-psychological approach. And this is how we use elements of nature to better connect people to spaces, to places, but also the people in those spaces. So how we enhance a sense of community. And this is enormously important in a post-pandemic COVID world, where people have been used to being stuck at home and now scared of going back to public places. This idea of socio-psychological, imagine sitting around a campfire, gazing into the flames, and everybody observing that kind of shared moment in nature. The socio-psychological is about how we enhance communities through connections to nature. Now, behind all those patterns are lots and lots of ideas that have been built up by environmental psychologists over the last 30 years. So there are lots of ideas here that support biophilic design. Things like attention restoration theory that help us to restore. Blue space theory that connects us with the value of bringing water into our built environment. Our circadian rhythms are our body's reactions to periods of light and dark, and how that light and dark help us to sleep better and wake up feeling more refreshed. Non-rhythmic sensory stimuli I'll talk about in a moment. Haptic invitations are about the textures that we find around us that connects us through our sense of skin and how that helps us to relax. Fractal theories are about how we use the patterns and shapes that we see in nature and how we can use these to reduce stress. And also the ecological valence theory is a color theory that suggests that when we use colors that remind us of moments spent in nature, we can elicit a similar physical, mental, and emotional response. So there's lots and lots of ideas that help us to create a better, healthier, and happier built environment. So I'm going to talk about a couple of those. Just first of all, attention restoration theory. Now, when we step into an office, many offices just are rows of desks. They think that when you step into the office, all you're going to do there is sit and work. Now, the problem with this is that when we sit and work, we use something called directed attention. This is what happens, this is what you're doing right now. You're watching the screen, you're listening to me, you're using your attention. And as human beings, we're very good at it, but we're not good at maintaining it. After a while, we become fatigued. We lose focus and concentration. Hopefully you won't lose concentration on what I'm telling you. But after a while, we all do. We become fatigued. Now, the other sort of attention is what we call effortless attention. This is what we have when we gaze out of a window, we look at nature, we look at the kind of gentle movement in nature, we daydream, and we just drift off. And this effortless attention is very good at helping us to restore and recuperate our physical and mental and cognitive abilities. So what we really want to be doing in the workplace is creating micro-recuperative moments, spaces where you can sit and work and focus, but also just off to the side, we can look out a window and see the movement of a tree or the ripples moving across a pool of water. So often these ideas are linked together with something called non-rhythmic sensory stimuli. This is a really complicated term, even for me, but non-rhythmic sensory stimuli is basically that beautiful sense of movement that you see when you look onto nature. So it might be the leaves gently moving in a tree, or the ripples moving across a pool of water, or flames flickering from a fire. So this is basically that soft, gentle movement that's continuously changing, that's seemingly chaotic, but is very sort of calm and safe and restorative. And this non-rhythmic sensory stimuli creates something called a soft fascination, a gentle sense of gaze that allows you to drift off and to restore your mental, physical energy. Now, one of the most exciting things for me about biophilic design, and I studied architecture for many years, is that actually it's an evidence-based approach. So it's based on many, many years, 30 to 40 years of research studies that have demonstrated that when we connect with nature, it has the ability to make us feel better, to reduce heart rates and blood pressure levels, to make us sort of recuperate better. So one of the interesting things about it is that we all share this love of nature. We've all had positive experiences. And that's very different to a lot of the approaches of other architectural design styles, because those can be very polarizing. Somebody might like classicism or modernism or postmodernism, but actually we all love nature. So when we bring nature into the built environment, it is what we call a universal design ethos. And it's also scalable. It doesn't need to be about spending lots of money, providing you think about it at an early enough stage. And there are lots of very simple things you can do. And of course, we know we can spend money on it as well. I'll come to that later. It's also evidence-based, and this evidence demonstrates what we call a return on investment. So the money you spend in integrating these connections to nature will be repaid through improved productivity, creativity, engagement, and innovation. And that's what the research shows. So what I want to show you now are some of the research studies across different building typologies that demonstrate how nature improves those spaces. In education spaces, improving access to natural light has been shown to improve the speed of learning by between 20 and 26%. It can reduce absenteeism in schools, can improve test scores by between 5 and 14%. That's just using natural light. And of course, when you have more natural light, you need less artificial light, so you reduce the kind of operational carbon of that building. Added to that, one research study showed that the use of timber, so an indirect connection to nature, in classroom had the ability to reduce student heart rates by 8,600 beats per day, just by the choice of material. In healthcare settings, there was a really important study back in the 1980s by a psychologist called Roger Ulrich that looked at the recuperation rates of patients coming out of gallbladder surgery. What he found was the patients that were looking onto a brick wall recuperated much slower than the patients who looked out onto trees and greenery. And in fact, those patients with views onto nature recuperated 8.5% faster, so nearly 10%. Separate studies have shown that patients who recuperate in natural light feel 22% less pain and need that much less medication. And also it's worth noting that actually there's this idea of the wellness industry in healthcare and wellness tourism has grown over the last few years by 20.9%. So it's absolutely very much a dynamic and growing market. In workplace, this is probably the area where we can measure the benefits of nature connections better than anywhere else. Introducing elements of nature has been shown to increase well-being by 15%, increase productivity by 6%, increase creativity by 15%. The numbers just go on and on. So if we can think of another design style that produces numbers or demonstration of the return on investment like that, it's almost impossible. In hospitality, studies have shown that actually guests are prepared to pay up to 23% more when they have views overlooking the garden or elements of nature than compared to traditional rooms. And actually want to pay 18% more when they have a view looking onto water. And hotel guests are prepared to spend 36% more time in hotel lobbies with elements of nature than without. So that's time spent buying drinks, buying food, without even necessarily renting a room. And in residential settings, what the studies show is that actually when elements of nature are present, like micro gardens or micro parks or trees in streets, there's a 5 to 8% increase in property prices. Homes in the UK are £2,500 more expensive when they're closer to areas of greenery than when they're further away. And people are increasingly saying that being close to nature is an essential feature when they choose new homes. It's also been shown to decrease potential property crime and violent crime. So this ability for nature just to calm, relax, and restore is incredibly important in creating a happier and harmonious living environment. Now, when we start to get into a little bit more detail, the studies have shown that the introduction of plants and greenery into interior spaces has the ability in workplaces to increase energy levels by an amazing 76%. Happiness goes up, productivity goes up by 6 to 15%, and absenteeism goes down by 15%. So that's, with the introduction of plants and greenery. And even our choice of materials has been shown to reduce stress and improve overall well-being and happiness. So this study by the organization CBRE, who was looking into the use of timber in the workplace, found that the introduction of wood and timber near to where people were sitting increased satisfaction by 34%, increased working life, satisfaction with working life by 25%, increased optimism and confidence, and the ability to concentrate. So again and again, what we see is direct and indirect, and these human spatial responses improve the quality of the environments of people working in them. So it's not just about, bringing these ideas in, it's how we actually more deeply think about integrating them across a range of spaces so that people have access to elements of nature, not just in the morning, but throughout the day, throughout those continual touch points. What I want to do now is just briefly show you 4 projects that we've worked on in the UK that have sought to connect occupants across a range of building typologies with nature. The first one is a build-to-rent scheme that we're working with an organisation called John Lewis Partnership. And what they're doing is they're taking their shopping stores and they're building 400 apartments above them. So our role in this is to increase nature connections, both inside and outside. It's to connect with the existing ecology and community, to link to the surrounding ecology, but also to create a greater sense of community in the building. So what we're doing is we're advising the urban planners, the landscapers, the architects, and the interiors designers to create that continual connection to nature throughout the building occupation. The second one I wanted to do was to show you a project we did with the Building Research Establishment in Watford in England. So the BRE are the organisation that have founded the BREEAM building certification method. And what we wanted to do was to measure the impact that biophilic design had. So we took a 2-year study to measure how people felt in an existing building. We used wearable technology. We monitored cortisol levels by doing kind of saliva tests. We did quantitative and qualitative studies. So we measured the natural light, the temperature, the humidity, but we also asked them questions. And what we found of the existing building was that actually many people thought that actually the existing building was okay in terms of, the indoor air quality was all right, the acoustics were okay, they weren't terrible, and the lighting was all right, it wasn't brilliant. But when we asked them how they felt in the building and how they were able to connect and their stress levels afterwards, actually they said that the building looked very poor, people weren't happy to bring people to the building, and that they felt stressed after work. So as a result of this building, survey, what we did is we created a biophilic foundation space. So we worked with a number of core partners to introduce real forms of nature in terms of the plants and the greenery. We enhanced natural light. We brought natural materials and textures on the floors and the timber on the walls, the natural colours and the shapes and the patterns of nature, and created the biophilic foundation space that people can work in and go and visit. The third case study is at the Hackney Garden School. The Hackney Garden School is a school for neurodiverse children, largely with autism. This is a very small little space, sits next to a playground that you can just see out here. And what the teachers told us was that the children got very stressed in the playground because of the level of autism that they had. So what they wanted to do is to use this space to give them somewhere to stop, rest, relax, and to recuperate. So we created 3 main features. Firstly, we created a window seat near the window that allowed the children to look out onto the activity through the glass, but without being surrounded by it, so give them that sense of prospect. We created a series of niches that the children could climb into there, and we covered them in carpet. So when they walked in, when they climbed into it, the sound changed, the textures changed, and they got that sense of retreat as as they could curl up and feel safe. And thirdly, at the end, we created an interactive feature here that had the shapes and colors and textures that they find in nature, so that when they pressed on top of them, they could feel shells or grass or natural textures. And then when they pressed it, they could see the light changed and a soundscape flooded the space. The sound of the wind going through the trees or birdsong or the sound of the seashore. And the final project I just wanted to show you was with a clothing company. So Lestrange is a British clothing company. They had an excellent sustainability policy, but what they weren't able to do was to communicate that sense of a love of nature through their store design. So what we did is we worked with them to understand who they were and what they wanted to do. We created an overall biophilic design strategy that translated their sustainability policy into a look and feel. We created a biophilic material strategy that not only connected people with nature, but that also helped to regenerate them. And we translated their ethos into spatial terms. And now what they're now doing is they're using that strategy and set of guidelines to create stores across England and across Europe to create spaces that feel a deeper connection to that sense of nature. So this is my final slide. Ultimately, what we want to be doing is to think about creating continual touch points of nature through something that we call the nature diet triangle. So thinking about how people connect with nature over time. Maybe that's, a yearly trip to go on holiday. I'm going to be in this room, sorry. I'll move to the side to get a clean shot in a moment. So maybe you connect with nature when you go away on a holiday, a really deep immersion. But also perhaps on a monthly, weekly, or daily moment, you connect with nature. And across a range of scales. Maybe that's an international holiday. Maybe you travel to a national park, or you go to a local park. But it's also about how you bring that sense of nature into the local urban plan, into the architecture, but also the interior landscape that you're creating. Because remember, you spend 90% of your life indoors. So thinking about how we connect with nature across time frames and across spaces is absolutely fundamental to our approach. So hopefully you've understood that this connection to nature is important to us. It's a universal design ethos, and that there are multiple benefits. There are benefits, of course, to us as architects and designers because we get to create better buildings for our clients, for our occupants. It's better for occupants who get to experience a lower level of stress and a better quality of life. And it's better, of course, for our clients who get to experience lower costs and a better return on their investment. But also there's an important point to make here, that when we understand that our health and well-being is intrinsically connected to the health and well-being of the nature that exists all around us, it leads us to a greater empathy and desire to maintain the well-being of our global natural environment. Biophilic design, I think, is an essential component in how we create better, healthier buildings that are fit for the future, because they're better for us, they're better for productivity, and of course they're better for the planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oliver. I love your philosophy. But now I want to call Massimo here because he wants to ask you something for your questions.
Okay.
This sounds scary.
Oliver, I have a poetic question and a very, as you say, prosaic question. I have two questions. What do you prefer? Poetic question or prosaic and realistic question?
Can we do both?
No, before.
Oh, go with the poetry. Go with the poetic question. Yeah,
Okay.
Let's start with that.
Allora, you know the origin of the word biophilic is from Greek, bio, life, and philic, that is meaning also love, okay? These two words in the work you did, are present because life, I think yes, but love in the work you did, there is or is something too abstract? You don't understand the question.
Is the question about using the word love in terms of architecture?
No, I'm meaning my personal interpretation is that in biophilic there is an approach very careful to the life of the persons. Is a way to put in the project some love. And to don't be too, too technique, too much connected with the figures, but with the real interior needings of the people. No, I mean in this sense there is, but I mean when you work, you consider this aspect because you speak about figures, numbers. Okay, it's a part very important, and it is to consider. But I think perhaps in this kind of theme, you have to consider also the psychological aspect of the people. No, in this space of work, you show is something of too abstract, or what do you consider in this sense?
I mean, I think firstly, as human beings, we've all had beautiful experiences in nature, whether it's a sunset going down or kind of the first snowfall of the season, or sitting at night with, the flickering flames of fire. So as modern human beings, we still recognize that nature provides richness, a sense of harmony, a sense of scale to our own lives, and that it connects with all of us in a very deep and meaningful way. And yet we have become very urbanized, we've become very technological. So we've started to believe in ourselves, perhaps too much, that actually our skills and our knowledge and our ability is more than nature. So we moved away from nature and we built, incredible urban geometric cities. And as human beings, I think we are very adaptable. But when we build these big, hard-edged glass and steel cities, and concrete cities, they're very different to the spaces in which we evolved. And I think we should look back and reflect on the beauty of nature that we still have, that we still create a sense of wonder and delight, and recognize that, and not believe in our own design abilities to create hard-edged modern geometric cities and expect people to still be happy. Because we can live in these spaces, but it doesn't mean that we're living our best lives. And what we want to do is to soften off some of these harder edges and to reflect on human evolution and the spaces that made us feel so good, and find a way of bringing that in. And I think there's a sort of double aspect here, and in part it's about creating better spaces for people. But more than that, in our environmental consciousness, we need to recognize that human beings are animals. We're part of nature, and that we need to create some sense of balance or harmony, and recognize our place in the natural world, not as the top of a food chain, but very much existing within it. We need to create ecosystem habitats that create other places for biodiversity to survive, thrive, and flourish. And when they do, then so will we.
Yeah. You answered me also with your passion. The passion that you show when you speak, it's the proof that you are very convinced about it.
Absolutely.
It's true.
Yeah.
I can stay here
No.
for days to listen to you.
The other question, more rational, no? Because in every aspect of the sustainability in general, speaking by the point of view of the architect, the designer, the projectist, there is, as you say, an approach and we are all agree that we must be sensible to the nature, sustainable, etc. But one question that the people normally did to me is there is a method to measure the results of this approach. And I mean, in biophilic science, there is a rational way to say this is more biophilic than the other one.
Well, there are a number of standards, as you may know, like the Living Building Challenge or the Well Building Standard, that seek to put a series of numbers and metrics on how we apply nature to the built environment. But it becomes a little bit like an accounting system. It's a bit like, well, if you put a plant there, then I can see it, that's biophilic design done.
Yeah.
But it is also about, you know, the feelings, the emotional response that we want to create with people. And as architects, we're always going to cross over between the technological and the emotional. So yes, you can put numbers on it. And I think it's important that we continue to do that. You know, I talked about the 30 years of research that have been undertaken to demonstrate the value of bringing nature into the built environment, but we need to continue with that in what we call pre- and post-occupancy evaluation, to run surveys and questionnaires to see how biodiversity is being measured. You know, we can count the number of plant species or animal species that are in an environment. We can count, you know, the quality of the air, the humidity, the temperature. There are lots of ways that we can measure it. But also we can run qualitative studies. We can ask people, do you like this space? It's just concrete and glass, and it's very hot and reflective and hard-edged. Or do you like this space filled with nature and plants and places to sit and look out over water and see, you know, gentle movement and feel cool and calm? So we can ask these qualitative questions. And I think it has to be a measure of both, that when we measure biophilic design, it's not just the numbers of things we can count, it's also about how we feel in that space and trying to capture the emotional response to that space.
I agree. It's important to find perhaps in the future some standard like, I don't know, in the various methods, no? The standard that we have to measure the sustainability in architecture, but at the same time I agree because at the end is the human perception of the quality that it's important.
Yeah, I'd like to pick you up on that point, because as human beings, we just create buildings for other human beings, right? Do we?
Yeah.
And so what happens to the rest of life? We go, I don't care. I don't care about the bees and the insects, the microbes in the plants. I don't care about the water systems, the rain, the climate. Can we honestly create and continue to create a built environment that pushes aside all nature because we want to create greater happiness? I believe that in the future what we need to be doing is creating a more life-centered approach, where life isn't just about human beings, that life remembers that as human beings we're part of nature, that we need to remember where the materials have come from and who's suffered because of the use of those materials. We need to remember who's being impacted by that building, and when I say who, it's not just the people, it's the fauna, the flora, the insects, and we need to look into the future about, you know, what's going to happen to this building afterwards. So this life-centered approach is really, you know, a more regenerative way of thinking about the built environment and not just thinking about the human benefits of the spaces we create.
Great. Thank you for your approach.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you, Massimo.